Thank you, Donald. Folks, I gather that that we are assembled this evening to address the question of conspiracy in the affairs of our government, and therefore that there will be some reason for theoretical speculation on what the existence of a conspiracy might mean, but also some reason for looking at facts, at actual historical narratives, and seeing to what extent and by means of what techniques of analysis it might be possible to adduce the existence of the mysterious, invisible sphere that we think of sometimes as the secret government, sometimes as the secret state, sometimes as the parallel demon within, in one interesting phraseology I heard the other night. In any case, a dark, hidden force that operates beneath the Constitution, beyond its pale, and which represents in our time the implicit subversion of constitutional democracy in America. I think the sense that something like this exists, that our condition is this parlous, is rather new in America. Americans have, over the decades and generations and centuries, been self-famous in any case for an optimism that brooks no such subversive ideas. And yet at the same time, according to the CBS poll that was just conducted in association with the CBS specials, I hope you've been seeing some of them, on the Kennedy assassination 25th anniversary, the CBS poll carried out just lately says 2/3 of the American people think there was a conspiracy at Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, in the death of JFK. 2/3 of the American people think that there was a cover-up of the truth in which the government was some way implicated. Only 13% of the American people agree with the official story of Dealey Plaza, namely that JFK was bumped off by a lone nut, who then a few days later was bumped off by Jack Ruby, another lone nut, in two joined episodes of violence that together had no more meaning than 2 heart attacks or 2 strokes or 2 bolts of lightning out of the blue, according to the official interpretation. Well, if we are at a state where 13% of the American people agree with the official theory, and fully 2/3 say no to the official theory, and implicitly, therefore, must believe that there was a conspiracy and that it got away, that it walked away from its deeds, that maybe somehow it profited from what it did. To think that 2/3 of the American people believe this is, to my mind, a little astounding, and even remains astounding, and maybe even becomes the more so in view of the fact that 2/3 of the American people believe the same damn thing 10 years ago and 15 years ago. The American people have been believing for a long time that they have been gulled, duped, deceived by whoever was responsible for finding out what happened in the death of Kennedy. For a long time, the American people have believed that some way or another, things are not right here, that our fair republic is in some respect or another undermined in an important way, one which we find very hard to describe, very hard to get our hands on. But we have some sense that we're not in control, that the constitutional forces are not making the decisions that direct the movement of our country. We have a sense that beyond any Marxist idea of an intervening economic elite, beyond that is to say the normal hegemony of the ruling class, we seem to face in our time the expression of an altogether different kind of force, or at least a different organization of that force. Or maybe it's not new and we are just having the scales dropped from our eyes for the first time. Maybe we were raised too innocently in the days of the Cold War. Maybe we grew up thinking that everything was straight and all right, and if we just had a somewhat clearer picture of our history, we'd see very well this conspiracy business is not new. This country's whole history is a boil when you come to face the truth of it, with a narrative that they never put together in the history classes, with a narrative that goes beyond the red, white, and blue and the apple pie and the George Washington and the great things about America, and that talks about the underside of it, that talks about that which is based in secret, that which is designed in secret, carried out in secret, that which is executed for no good end for the public, upon the public, upon the body of the public and its constitution. Now, normally we have been able, I say normally, for the post-war generations of America, we have been able to believe that our system functions correctly, all in all, that there's some corruption, but it's on a human scale. It doesn't actually undermine the whole fabric of the government. I think now we've gone beyond that. It seems to me now we've gone as a people, in our time, in our connected generations here on earth at this moment, we've gone beyond the platitudes upon which we were reared, and we don't really know what to think. We would love to believe in the virtues, the value, the perdure of the democratic system. We would like to believe that for all the problems we've had in the past decades, the country still basically holds together. The ship of state is still basically seaworthy. And yet, we find it so hard to reconcile that faith with what we find out, to be true about the way the government works. We didn't want to find out that the president could be as crooked as Richard Nixon was. We didn't want Watergate. The American people weren't looking for it, and I think you could even demonstrate that the media were trying as hard as they could to get away from it for as long as they could. There was no eagerness to face the truth of Watergate, just as there was no eagerness to face the truth of Vietnam. And there's no eagerness to face the truth of Kennedy. And yet the American people say they know the truth. The truth is different from the official line. So an enormous tension seems to me to be setting up in our society, one that is reverberating now for quite a long time. On the one hand, you have a mass consciousness that absolutely apprehends, without being able to pin down the details, the presence of a conspiratorial force, an illegitimate force going far beyond Lee Harvey Oswald in the death of the president in 1963. A titanic majority, and not for just a day or an hour, but for a long time, for a decade and a half anyway. That's what American people have thought. They're that smart, they're that bright, they're that capable of putting a couple of things together. I think it's good that we have not been gulled, that we have as a people, as a country, been able largely to see through the nonsense that Lee Oswald did it and acted alone. And yet, on the other hand, the mass media and the institutions of official government seem equally convinced in an opposing ratio that the lone assassin theory is good and is adequate, and all this other stuff about conspiracies is just a kind of a nonsense or the expression of a mental disorder of some kind. That is to say, the public and the organs of public opinion, of public expression, seem to be exactly running counter to each other on this question. Each perhaps losing faith in the other. The media intellectuals groaning that ordinary people could be such intellectual stumblebums as to fall for all this conspiracy nonsense. And the consumers of the media's product becoming, for their part, increasingly cynical and jaded and incapable of placing any great faith in that estate. There's a pulling apart of what we think and how we say what we think. There's a pulling apart of how we feel about an important national experience and how we express our feelings. And I think that has something to do with the way that people are pulling back from politics, the way people just flat won't vote. They know the elections are important. They know the issues are grave. But it seems to me that there's creeping throughout the society, maybe creeping is a silly word for it, and it's moving at a great galloping velocity. There's a sense that the diadem has been squandered, that what we had going for us, we've lost. The very self-governance, which is at the core of our idea of ourselves as Americans, seems to have been ravished below the back stairs. And those who did it appear to have gotten away, not even to have been numbered or identified. And those who are the victims of it have been forced to spin in uncertainty, year after year after year, being lulled sometimes into hope that something would happen, that there would be a breakthrough, that the official position would change, as it did for a moment in 1978, when the House Select Committee on Assassinations reported that it had found evidence of conspiracy in JFK. For a moment, there was a coinciding of what the popular mind felt about the war and what an official institution was saying, and therefore what the media were saying. Walter Cronkite saying on CBS, well, it appears that there was, after all, a conspiracy in Dallas. New York Times, big headline. Conspiracy in Dallas. President killed by 2 gunmen at least. Cuban connection suspected. Many leads. Mysterious, unexplored, remaining to be looked into. Suddenly this was the voice of the mass media. But then a little time went by, a very little time went by, a very slight number of objections were raised to the finding of conspiracy that the committee had reached. Immediately the mass media shut down shop on it, and once again, it became silly of you to think that there were conspiracies in America. Banal, sensationalistic, immature, unsophisticated of us to think that there were forces behind the scenes pulling levers that we didn't know existed. And being willing to kill, yes, being willing to kill, being willing to get people killed. I've just been lecturing about the Kennedy assassination out in Long Island, and I've been down in Fort Worth lately. Last week I was in Tulane and New Orleans. A lot of people want to talk about the JFK case, and it's been much on my mind. I know it's on everyone's mind these days because we're at the 25th anniversary, and there have been a lot of recollections, and a great many of them looking at this question of conspiracy. And it's almost a deja vu for me to be talking about this stuff because 10, 12, 15 years ago, I was out on a hustings too talking about this stuff, showing in many cases the same slides, showing the same Zapruder film, talking about the same timing problems with the official version of the shooting, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a difference. In those days when people said, well, it does look like there was a conspiracy, then what should we do? Well, in those days, I could say, write your congressman, write the senator, get the Congress to investigate the thing. They'll look into it, they'll find the truth, we'll see, we'll know, we'll set it to rights, we'll be okay. And there was a real charge to that in the wake of Watergate. And then when a couple of hoodlums, Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana, were gunned down under federal protection as they were about to talk to the Church Committee and the Schweikert Committee about the Cuban mafia connections, there was an immense uproar, an immense demand on the part of the public. Senators and representatives out on the campaign trail will all come back to Washington and say, well, the first thing that everybody wanted to talk about was some local issue. The second thing that everybody wanted to talk about was always the JFK case, all across the country, north, south, east, west, and the center. Everybody had been awakened by what happened to Nixon and Watergate. And for a moment, the public and the mass media were running on something like the same path, understood that there was a hidden truth, understood that it was going to take a special kind of journalism, a special kind of commitment. And for a while, it looked like we might get somewhere. But I think we ran up against another brick wall when, in the beginning of the 80s, the government refused to pick up on the Kennedy case and push it through. Just decided more or less arbitrarily that the case was closed. Recently did try formally to close the case, even though you can't close a capital case, president or not. Once again, there's this pulling away, this turning away. Even when CBS did its documentary, on one of the days they talked to Doris Kearns, a big liberal, who could only say, of all those people who thought that conspiracy existed in Dallas, she says, oh, people have some psychological need to believe in conspiracies. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to know where they are. It's as though it were a mental affliction of those who have been bringing the news about this case, as though it were something wrong with the way we think about the world that makes us point to the misalignment of shadows in the Oswald photos, for example, or the incomprehensibility of the shot timing in the shooting of Kennedy and Connally, or the ties that Oswald had to well-known mafia figures and operatives of organized crime and CIA right-wingers trying to pull a fast one against the Cuban Revolution. As though it were our derangement that made us see these things. And in a way, I think it is. It is our madness. It is the madness of the 60s, the madness to be free, the madness to be free of cant and nonsense and bullshit, the madness to get at the bottom of what's been happening to this country. to face these problems of conspiratorial play in our political system, to face them straight on and to get at the bottom of them. But now we are at this funny place where people have said that they want the Kennedy assassination probed through, and the King assassination too. And nothing happened. The wheels just spun, and finally there was nothing there. No more enthusiasm for it, no more zeal. And even though the public continued to believe at the same levels, at the same intensities, that they were being fooled about Dallas, about Memphis, about Los Angeles when Bobby Kennedy was killed, and how many more. Little death squad activity in the good old USA. Even though the people continued to feel that this represented our estate, the media pulled right back, the government pulled right back, and we are at a case now where I don't know what to say when people say, what should we do about the conspiracies among us? I don't know. I think it's clear that we should understand that they exist, and we should be realistic about what their presence means. We should see what the evidence asks us to see about the uncontrollability of the CIA, the refusal of the FBI at important points to obey the law, and the problems that we have with determining succession of the presidency by constitutional means. Now, what comes of understanding that, I don't know. I've got to say it. I don't know. I can't issue a call to arms as I could a dozen years ago. I said, let's go to Washington and crack this case. And everybody said, ha ha, you can't do that. Well, we did it. We went to Washington. We got that committee going. We got the investigation. The investigation was well funded. It was carried out by a crack technical staff, and they found the conspiracy. If they had been able to carry their investigation on another $1 million in 6 months, they would have grabbed it by the tail. I'm convinced of that. They had found the track of the mafia in the execution of the president in 1963. But because its time ran out, its money ran out, the committee could only carry its leads over to the Justice Department, which was just about to go Reagan. The issue was put on suspense until Reagan was there, then he was gone. And the people, what could they do? They still believed there was a conspiracy at Dallas. Iran-Contra taught us that truth another way, just as Watergate had before. But the fact seems to be that our condition is that of a stuck people. Stuck, like the people in a Kafka novel, staring up at the castle, knowing that violent and terrible things happen up there that affect all our lives, but incapable, at least for the moment, of forming, even at the conceptual level, the ideal of a response that makes any kind of sense. I think that represents the quandary that we are facing collectively as a nation and as a people at this time. Thank you.
And now we'll have Robert Anton Wilson.
There is a theory of the Kennedy assassination that obviates the necessity of postulating conspiracy. This theory was invented by my friend Paul Krasner, who puts out a wonderful little magazine called The Realist. The theory is that Kennedy was possessed by a demon. And just like in The Exorcist, at the time Oswald was firing, Kennedy turned his head 180 degrees, just like Linda Blair. I offer that theory for whatever comfort it gives to people who find it spooky to think about conspiracies. I would like to talk about some of the unsolved mysteries of our time and the empty bits. There's been a great deal of conspiracy literature in the last 20 years. As a matter of fact, I've written a lot of it myself now that I look back. In the Watergate tapes, as Carl pointed out in his book, The Yankee and Cowboy War, or The Cowboy and Yankee War, there seems to be some disagreement about the title going on here tonight. The Yankee and Cowboy War. Now, when Nixon, everybody knows Nixon agreed to pay Howard Hunt $1 million. The interesting thing in the tapes is that he was paying Hunt that money not to talk about that, quote, that whole Bay of Pigs thing. Now, what Bay of Pigs thing was that? By 1973, we knew just about everything about the Bay of Pigs, or we thought we did. We knew that it was planned by the CIA. It was not an autochthonous Cuban uprising. It was American financed and guided. We knew Kennedy. The Kennedys picked it up from Nixon, who had started it under the Eisenhower administration. What big Bay of Pigs thing is there that we didn't know? Whatever it is, we still don't know it, because Hunt got the hush money and it's never come out. We can only guess what the big Bay of Pigs thing was. All we know is that Hunt's wife got $100,000 and got on an airplane, and the plane crashed with a lot of cyanide in the pilot's blood, and she had $10,000 on her. And the rest is lost in mist and speculation. One Bay of Pigs thing that has fascinated me is the career of Hernandez Cataya, who was a Cuban member of the Bay of Pigs invasion force. He popped up in the news 20 years later. He was indicted for, he was president of a bank in Miami called the World Finance Corporation. Hernandez Cataya was indicted for knowingly, according to the district attorney of Dade County, knowingly operating the biggest cocaine laundromat ever discovered in North America. That is, we nowadays know, or people who follow the literature know, that everybody in the banking business is in the cocaine business. You can't separate them. The money has got to be laundered somewhere. Every banker knows he's laundering cocaine money part of the time. He hopes he doesn't get caught at it. Some bankers are finicky and they hope that it's not going on in their bank, but they have deep suspicions that some of the money that flows through is connected with the mafia or the CIA or the Contras or some part of the cocaine business. But the World Finance Corporation, according to the district attorney's evidence, didn't have some money coming in there occasionally from the cocaine business. They were set up principally to hide cocaine money. That's what the district attorney charged. He got convictions in the case of 4 of the officers of the bank. There were 8 officers of the bank whom, according to the district attorney, he could not bring to trial because the CIA intervened on their behalf and blocked his investigation. Cataya was a former CIA employee. There were at least 3 other former CIA employees working on the staff of that bank. I don't know if this is part of the Bay of Pigs thing that Nixon was paying Hunt not to talk about, or it's just coincidentally connected with the Bay of Pigs, but it's interesting. The CIA was using the bank for payments to deep cover agents in Latin America, so they were not just loosely connected with the bank. It was one of their major funnels, as well as being one of the major funnels of their good friends, the cocaine growers of Latin America. The money went from the World Finance Corporation in Miami to the Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas. The Cisalpine Bank was owned by Roberto Calvi, president of the Banco Ambrosiano in Milan, and Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, manager of the Vatican Bank in Vatican City. Calvi died mysteriously while under indictment from massive stock and currency frauds, embezzling funds from his own bank, and all sorts of conspiratorial activity. If he had lived long enough, he would have been indicted for conspiring to overthrow the government of Italy and install a fascist coup, because Calvi was part of the group known as P2, or P2, which have all been charged with conspiring to overthrow the Italian government and reinstate a fascist government. P2 included such players as Roberto Calvi, found hanging from the bridge in London, co-owner of the Cisalpine Bank, which laundered the cocaine money after it got out of the World Finance Corporation, and Michele Sindona, who was a lawyer for the mafia, later had several banks of his own in Italy and the Franklin National Bank in this country, which went belly up when Sindona was indicted on 65 counts of stock and currency fraud and embezzling $55 million from his own bank and swindling a lot of people and so on. After being convicted on all of those charges in New York, he was extradited to Italy, where he was convicted of murdering a bank examiner. He was then put on trial for the first of the major P2 crimes that the Italian investigating magistrates have gotten together a detailed case on, which was the Bologna railway bombing. And he was poisoned in his cell before he could stand trial on those charges. Calvi was found hanging from a bridge, from the middle of the bridge. He was a 62-year-old man, overweight, not given to exercise, not a fitness freak at all. Yet the Scotland Yard originally proposed that it was a suicide. They claimed this out-of-shape 62-year-old man climbed over the side of the bridge and climbed hand over hand to the middle of the bridge and then hanged himself there after thoughtfully putting bricks in his pocket first. There was a lot of outcry in the British press. We're not the only country where conspiracies go on. There was a lot of outcry in the British press that Calvi was a Freemason and the inspector in charge of the case was a Freemason. And wasn't it funny that Calvi was hanged where the rising tide would cover his dead body? Because that's the punishment in the first-degree Freemasonic oath for Freemasons who betray other Freemasons. So it was suggested in the British press that Calvi was killed by Freemasons and a Freemason in Scotland Yard was covering up for them. That led to a reopening of the case, and the jury returned an open verdict saying they couldn't decide whether it was murder or suicide. Calvi's wife says the Vatican killed him, but she's a hysterical widow, so we can't believe her ravings and rantings. Archbishop Marcinkus, who ran the Vatican Bank part of the system, which laundered the cocaine money and also shipped guns to Latin America, was the P2 conspiracy that provided the guns for the Argentine military to invade the Falklands with. Licio Gelli, who set up the whole system of interlocking banks that could launder cocaine funds and run guns for terrorists on the side, which ran through Calvi's Banco Ambrosiano and World Finance Corporation and the Cisalpine Bank and the Franklin National Bank, and sometimes ran through good old Chase Manhattan Bank, too. Licio Gelli, who set all that up, was apparently, according to evidence developed by Penny Lernow in the National Catholic Reporter and by David Yallop in his book In God's Name, Gelli was on the payroll of both the CIA and the KGB. I think the only way anybody can make any sense out of this at all is to assume that, well, the CIA is running its own invisible government and the KGB is running its invisible government. One part of the Roman Empire never fell and is still trying to reconquer the Western world. Alan Watts said that to me 20 years ago. He said the major error of professional historians is the belief that the Roman Empire fell. It never did. It still runs most of the Western world through the Vatican and the Mafia. And it's taken me 20 years to figure out how much truth there was in that little joke of Alan's. Licio Gelli infiltrated 900. 90. Isn't that funny? I don't know. I don't understand that. I'm going to digress for a minute. What kind of synaptical fuck-up in the brain turns 900 into 90? I dropped a Z in my head, and I don't understand the neurological process there.
It's the same thing that divides people's ages in half.
Ah, okay. Gelli had over 900 P2 people in the Italian government. When he was indicted on the same charges as Calvi and Sindona and plotting to overthrow the government, et cetera, he immediately fled Italy because the head of the secret police was one of the 900 people he had in the government, and the head of the secret police tipped him off. They were coming to arrest him. The head of the secret police, General Musumeci, died while he was under indictment for terrorist bombings, which were planned to look like they were left-wing bombings. The deputy chief of the secret police is currently under indictment for conspiring in the same crimes. Gelli escaped to Uruguay. He came back a year later to get some money out of a numbered Swiss bank account, which is probably where most of the cocaine and heroin money ends up, is in numbered Swiss bank accounts. Gelli was arrested by the Swiss authorities, who put him in their maximum security prison. There are two things to understand about the Swiss. They are not only the cleanest people in Europe, as everybody knows who's ever been there, and the most annoying, but they also have the reputation for the most incorruptible police in Europe. They managed to hold Licio Gelli for 3 days in maximum security. Then he disappeared and reappeared again in Uruguay. That still has not been explained. But now the prison has become a tourist attraction. People used to go to Geneva to see the artworks. Now they go to see the prison Licio Gelli flew out of on mystical wings. I suggested when I was in Geneva the last time, they should put 3 statues over the doors of the prison for all so all the tourists can take pretty pictures. They'd be see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. And then in tasteful Gothic German, it would say Ficken Sie nicht mit P2. The Vatican Bank was accused of being infiltrated by Freemasons by a fellow named Nino Pecorelli, who published a journal called Osservatore Politico. He developed evidence that the Grand Loge Alpina, as well as the Pei Dui Lodge, had infiltrated the Vatican Bank. Pecorelli sent his evidence to Pope John Paul I, who read it over and ordered Cardinal Vio to conduct a thorough investigation. Then, unfortunately, JP1, John Paul I, unfortunately, he was taken suddenly dead as soon as he gave that order and was quickly buried. The Vatican has refused to show the death certificate to any inquiring journalist. There was no autopsy, and he was replaced by John Paul II, who, if he had a sense of humor at all, would have called himself John Paul Ringo, as you all know. The Grand Loge Alpina, the people that Harold Wilson, no relative of mine, the people Harold Wilson called the Gnomes of Zurich. He liked to pronounce the G. Most Americans don't. The Gnomes of Zurich. They are the people who run the Swiss banks. The Swiss banks are the last haven for libertarians and other criminals. You can get a total confidentiality about your financial transactions by running them through Swiss banks. Total confidentiality, except the Gnomes of Zurich know about it because they own all the Swiss banks. It is widespread opinion in Europe for a couple of hundred years now that the Gnomes of Zurich are all members of the Grand Loge Alpina. The Grand Loge Alpina circulates in Switzerland the literature of the Priory of Sion in France. The Priory of Sion seems to run most of the French banks. It includes such interesting members as Otto von Habsburg, who's also one of the founders of the Bilderbergers, and bears the traditional family title of King of Jerusalem, and is the president of the Society for the United States of Europe, which is limited world federalism, just get all the Europeans into one country. He's a Knight of Malta also. The Priory of Sion has been the subject of a lot of fascinating books, and I think this is the reason why most people who get into conspiracy literature eventually give up under the impression, if I read any more of this, I'll go crazy. The Priory of Sion exists. There's no doubt about that, and it includes some of the richest people in France, probably. It includes some of them anyway. The Priory of Sion, according to various books, has various origins. According to La Race Fabuleuse by Gerard de Sade, the Priory of Sion is made up of descendants from extraterrestrials who intermarried with the tribe of Benjamin in ancient Judea. According to Michael Lammay's book, Jules Verne, Initiate and Initiator, the Priory of Sion has secret doings with immortal superhuman beings who live in the center of the earth, which, as you all know, is hollow. According to Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the Priory of Sion is made up of descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. This is going to make a great movie. There'll be even more pickets than there were for the Last Temptation of Christ. Another book called The Cult of the Black Virgin by a Dominican monk says the Priory of Sion is responsible for all the black virgins in Europe. These are statues allegedly of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The BVM is Catholics call her. The only woman in history who never had an orgasm. She's considered the next to God because of that. Catholics have the idea that an orgasm somehow does something that permanently degrades and besmirches you forever. She's the only woman in history who never had an orgasm, so she's the only woman in history the Catholics don't hate. There are several hundred statues of her in which she is black and usually with Negroid features, although sometimes black with Caucasian features. These statues are all over Europe, and they're a perpetual mystery to archaeologists. I once devised the theory they were put there by Rastafarians. This turns out not to be true. These statues are hundreds of years old. They existed before the Rastafari cult was formed. According to this Dominican monk, Ion Beg, these statues were put all over Europe by the Priory of Sion, and they're part of an educational project which will eventually result in the unification of Christianity and Islam. Got that? I think the main conclusion one can draw from this literature is that French conspirators have a greater sense of humor than Italian conspirators or American conspirators. The Priory of Sion doesn't mind us knowing it's there. They just want to keep us amused and confused so that we don't think about what they're doing with the money in the banks that they run and how it ties in with the Vatican Bank and the Bilderbergers and this gang and that gang. Carl Oglesby, whose book, The Yankee and Cowboy War, I have praised numerous times, and I will stop to praise it again. He offered the most interesting multi-conspiracy model I had seen when that book was published. The reason conspiracy literature has a bad name is because so much of it is written by clinical paranoids. I'm sorry, but that seems to be true to me. One of the distinguishing signs of the clinical paranoid is the neat, tidy explanation that explains everything. I'm not trying to do that tonight. I'm trying to show you how confusing it all is. The neat, tidy explanation is that one group is smarter than all the other conspiracies on the planet and really has infiltrated all of them and controls them. And depending on the flavor of the paranoia, it's either the Jesuits or the Elders of Zion or the Bavarian Illuminati or the Queen of England, according to Lyndon LaRouche. According to Pete McAlpine, who puts out Albionics Research, formerly the Conspiracy Digest, the two major conspiracies in the world are the British royal family and the Vatican, and everything can be explained by the fight between them. I think that's part of the truth. I don't think they can explain everything, but there is a struggle continuously between Northern Protestant wealth and Southern Catholic wealth in Europe, just like there's a struggle in this country, as Professor Oglesby has pointed out, between the old Yankee banks and the new Western entrepreneurs. To show you how complicated it all is, all the evidence in the Calvi-Sindona jelly conspiracy has on the surface a convincing patina that causes almost everybody who writes about it, especially in the American press where they haven't studied it as closely as the European press has, they refer to it as a Freemasonic conspiracy. Well, the interesting thing is there have been Freemasonic conspiracies, and they've all been libertarian, all the ones we know anything about. There were Freemasons involved in the American Revolution, and the French Revolution, and the First Mexican Revolution of 1810, and the Paris Commune in the 1870s. One of the most successful techniques used among domesticated primates to confuse the enemy, and that's an old English toast, confusion to the enemy. I use that toast occasionally, and my wife says he's confused already. She's thinking of George Bush. The Illuminati, one of the favorite obsessions of true clinical paranoids, or people with a weird, spicy sense of humor. The Illuminati was a secret society within Freemasonry, but it wasn't going in quite the same direction as Freemasonry. The Molly Maguires were a terrorist revolutionary group within the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which was a benevolent association working for parliamentary change. Pei Due put on such a convincing Masonic cover that it's a distinct surprise to notice that all of the ringleaders were not only connected with the Vatican Bank, but they were all Knights of Malta. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta, which has its headquarters in Vatican City, is an 800-year-old secret society for Catholic lay entities. I can't say lay persons because that suggests human chauvinism. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta, or SMAM, is 800 years old, and it's made up of Catholic lay entities devoted entirely to a simple proposition, which makes sense to intellectual Catholics, that the world has been going to hell ever since the Protestant Reformation. All we've got is conflicting religions, conflicting ideas, conflicting values, and perpetual war. Everything will be peaceful and happy and tranquil again when everyone in the Western world submits to the Pope, and he decides all hard questions. Orson Welles said once, every villain has his reasons. I think that's the significant thing left out of most conspiracy theory is we don't look into their reasons. They always have noble reasons. Inevitably. That's what's wrong with the Prodigals of the Elders of Zion. You can tell it's a forgery right away because they talk like villains in 19th century melodramas. To further our evil course, we will introduce pornography to the goys. Nobody talks like that. Or psychopolitics, in which Berea tells the what later became the KGB, how to corrupt America with psychoanalysis. We will destroy their values by teaching them degenerate Jewish doctrines. No, people, well, the real villains say, in order to bring stability back into the situation and put it in the hands of responsible people who'll do the right thing, we'll have to kill those bums over there who are crazy. But they always talk about doing it for higher values. Anyway, the Knights of Malta, which is devoted, as I said, to restoring the Vatican to its former preeminence, among members of the Knights of Malta were Michele Sindona, the mafia lawyer and banker who ran the Franklin National and who was at Nixon's first inauguration, by the way, and Licio Gelli, who put together the whole system of interlocking banks that make up the backbone of the drug laundering networks of the world today, and Roberto Calvi, Banco Ambrosiano and Cisalpine Bank with Archbishop Marcinkus. Jelly was at Reagan's inauguration, yes. There's a picture of Reagan and Jelly laughing together at the inauguration. I'd love to know what they were laughing about. They still haven't found out that Bay of Pigs thing, I suppose. In 1963, Mary Pinchot Meyer told Timothy Leary, you better shut up about LSD and drug research and free scientific inquiry and all that stuff. The CIA wants to keep LSD a secret. They want to be the only ones in the world who know how to use it. Mary Pinchot Meyer spoke with some authority. She had been Leary's mistress, but then again, who hasn't? And she had also been John Kennedy's mistress. And she was an interesting link between the scientific community and the political community. And her husband, Cord Meyer, won the CIA Distinguished Intelligence Medal 2 or 3 times, I forget which, I think 3 times. Mary Pinchot Meyer was shot dead on a street in Washington a few months after JFK. Marilyn Monroe, another of Kennedy's mistresses, died under highly mysterious circumstances. The hour of her death was concealed. Her body was taken out of the house, brought back again later. Somebody went through the house, removing all evidence of her affairs with John and Bobby Kennedy. The coroner of Los Angeles said it was murder, but they made him shut up. The evidence indicates at least that whatever happened was being covered up while the Kennedys, evidence linking her to the Kennedys, was being removed. Perhaps the people who did that did it in all innocence, thinking we must protect the Kennedy name from besmirchment by letting people know that they have orgasms too, just like ordinary people, and with beautiful blondes yet. And maybe they thought that's all they were doing, was covering up Bobby's and John's affairs with her, and they covered up the evidence for murder without even knowing there was a murder. Or maybe there was no murder. Maybe Marilyn got depressed, took too many pills, or just lost count of how many she was taking. And in covering up the Kennedy connection, they made it look like there was a murder. There are a lot of questions we just don't know the answers to. Judith Exner was another of Kennedy's mistresses, and she was the mistress of Sam Giancana. Now, that's extremely weird. Did Giancana say to her, hey, I want you to go ball the president, and after he gets used to it and thinks he likes it regular, we're going to bring in some guys with cameras, and then we really have something on him? Maybe something like that was going through Giancana's head. The House Select Committee on Assassinations thought there was something like that going through his head. But then Giancana had delivered Chicago to Kennedy at the suggestion of Frank Sinatra, who said, Sam, if you give him Chicago, he'll lay off you. Well, Kennedy got Chicago, and he didn't lay you off, and Sam Giancana was right pissed off. I can identify with him. If I fixed an election, I'd expect to get a reward. I wouldn't expect to have Bobby and the Justice Department hounding me all the time. I think I have gone on perhaps a little longer than I should have, so I'll close with what I consider the synecdoches of our age, the Joycean epiphanies. Archbishop Romeros was a libertarian theologian. Some of you have heard of him. Among his doctrines were that poverty is not the will of God. Poverty is the will of evil men. He was shot dead while he was saying Mass. The death squads who shot him were financed by the cocaine money which was laundered through the Vatican Bank run by Archbishop Marcinkus, who worships the same God as Archbishop Romeros, and probably just as sincerely in his own way. And the other epiphany of our clandestine age is that the reason Bobby Kennedy broke off his affair with Marilyn Monroe is because somebody in the Justice Department said, hey, we got these tapes of Sam Giancana talking about the tapes he has of you. And Bobby listened to the tapes, and by Jesus, Sam Giancana did have tapes of him. Bobby used to meet Marilyn at Peter Lawford's beach house in Malibu, where they could be out of sight of reporters and other busybodies. And they'd make bouncy, as John Cleese would say. And there was a bug in Peter Lawford's bedroom that had been installed by a private detective. The private detective was paid by Sam Giancana, Johnny Roselli, and Jimmy Hoffa. Giancana and Roselli were later shot. Jimmy Hoffa was translated to a higher plane. He can no longer be found on the surface of the earth. There are rumors that he's part of a highway in Illinois. But just think about that. Carl said a lot of very important things tonight about how people are beginning to suspect what's going on. But you don't really begin to grasp what's going on until you get the whole beauty of the picture of Bobby and Marilyn Monroe making the sports and dalliance of sweet love while Sam Giancana is listening in with a bug planted by a private detective, and Sam is talking about it to his other friends in the mafia. Boy, are we getting something on Bobby. You should hear that guy go at it. And Bobby is hearing this from somebody in the Justice Department who's tapping Sam Giancana. We are all part of the same strange loop. The system is totally insane. When we've reached this point where treachery is the normal mode of human behavior, everybody is spying on everybody, when nobody trusts anybody, we have reached a state of clinical paranoia as a culture, and we've got to change. Otherwise, we'll decay completely, and we'll all end up locking one another up to protect ourselves from each other. Sanity is a word that is rapidly being drained of meaning.